In the last part of the program, we saw some of the tasks necessary to pull cable into conduit between two manholes. Well, in this part of the program, we're going to follow a crew as they install a length of cable. While the procedures you'll be seeing are typical, they're by no means the only way cable can be installed. Be sure to check with your supervisor to find out what your company's procedures are. As we said earlier, cable installation can be thought of as a job with a number of key steps. The first step, which may be done weeks before the actual cable installation is done, is advanced planning. For this job, the pre-planning has already been done. The cable reel has been delivered to the site, and a pulling eye has been installed on one end of the cable. Also, the crew has determined which manhole will be the feed hole and which will be the pulling hole. The remaining installation steps are done at the job site. After the vehicles and work sites have been secured, the crew holds a tailgate conference to discuss the job. They discuss the different crew responsibilities as well as any safety procedures they need to follow. As part of the tailgate conference, the crew also establishes radio contact between the pulling manhole and the feed manhole. After the tailgate conference, each crew begins to prepare its manhole for the installation. This means making a visual inspection and an atmospheric test of the manhole. When it's determined that the manholes are safe to enter, the second installation step is preparing the conduit for the cable installation. To enable the crew to insert a jet line and different types of duct cleaning equipment, this crew will use flexible steel rodding. The end of the rodding is lowered to a crewman in the manhole from a reel on top of the manhole. On this job, it doesn't matter which manhole the duct is rodded from. In this case, it's at the feed hole. The rodding is inserted into the conduit and pushed through to the pulling manhole. In the pulling manhole, a crewman attaches a 1/4-inch jet line to the rodding. Then the crew at the feed end pulls the rodding and the jet line back through the conduit. The jet line can now be used to string the pulling rope into the conduit. Next, the conduit is cleaned using a mandrel and a wire brush. First, the mandrel is rigged between the pulling rope and a tag line. The mandrel is used to remove any large obstructions from the conduit run. The tag line is used to ensure that the conduit remains threaded during the cleaning, and to make sure that a cleaning tool can be retrieved if a line should break or become hung up in the conduit. Then the wire brush is sent through to remove any loose debris. Another installation step is positioning the above-ground equipment. Here, the cable reel has been mounted on a trailer which has been positioned next to the manhole so that the reel is located directly over the length of conduit into which the cable will be installed. The crewmen then position the feed tube in the opening of the feed manhole and tie it into place. Next, they lower a hand line through the feed tube to bring the pulling rope up to the cable reel. Once the hand line is connected to the pulling rope, the small end of the tube is inserted into the run of conduit. The cable pulling rope, sometimes called a bull line, is then attached to the pulling eye on the cable. Then, the end of the cable is positioned into the feed tube by hand. Now that the rigging is completed at the feed manhole, let's move over to the pulling hole. After the tailgate conference, the pulling crew positioned the winch truck to make the pull from the manhole. Then, they fed the pulling rope through the conduit to the feed hole. Now they'll proceed to rig the pulling manhole. To see how the rigging is set up, let's look at a simplified illustration. This manhole has a pulling eye, so a snatch block and chain can be rigged. The conduit comes into the side of this manhole in such a way that the rope and cable must be pulled around a 90-degree turn. A large diameter sheave is installed to allow the rope and cable to be pulled around the 90-degree turn and up to the snatch block without damaging the cable. The winch on the pulling truck can't be positioned to make a direct pull from the snatch block, so a trap block is installed on the manhole opening. This avoids having the rope pulled over the edge of the manhole opening. Once the equipment is in place, the crewman strings the pulling rope through the snatch block, the sheave, and the trap block. The crew at the pulling hole then notifies the crew at the feed hole that they are ready for the pull. The feed crew verifies that the pulling rope has been attached and is free and clear. Then the pull is begun. As the cable enters the feed tube, a crewman lubricates the cable sheath. The lubricant reduces the friction between the cable sheath and the inside of the conduit, making it easier to pull the cable. As the cable enters the feed tube, the crew inspects the cable jacket for scratches or other damage. If there's substantial damage, the pull may have to be stopped. Company guidelines for handling cable damage vary, so be sure you're aware of your company's procedures. The feed crew also regulates the movement of the cable reel during the pull to eliminate the possibility of loose coils. To avoid stressing the cable pull should be smooth and constant, and the cable shouldn't be allowed to slacken. The pull continues until the cable reaches the pulling manhole. Care is taken to stop the pull in time to avoid running the cable into the snatch block. If the cable needs to be pulled further into the manhole, a special cable grip, often called a mare's tail, is used. The grip ropes are woven around the cable, and the grip is attached to the pulling rope to pull the cable the additional few feet. When the pull is complete, the sheath and the seal on the pulling eye are inspected. Then the cable is placed on the cable rack in the manholes. At the feeding end, the cable is cut off the reel with enough slack for proper installation, and the end is sealed. Then, that end of the cable is also placed on the manhole cable rack. At this point, the cable pull is complete. So as you can see, the cable installation followed the basic steps we saw earlier. First, the job was planned in advance to determine the equipment and personnel needed for the job. Then the duct was prepared for the pull by rodding it with flexible steel rodding. Then the above-ground equipment was positioned for the cable pull. The two manholes were rigged, and the pull was made. Now, the method we just saw is typical of how many pulls from manhole to manhole can be done. All cable runs, however, are not between two manholes. When we come back, we'll see how cable can be fed and pulled from the same manhole. So far in this program, we've been looking at cable installation in areas that are easily accessible to personnel and equipment. In some cases, however, cable may have to be installed where access is limited. For example, cable may have to be installed in conduit from a manhole to a building's service connection. Truck-mounted equipment cannot access the building. In this part of the program, we're going to look at how a job like this can be handled. We'll watch a crew install a bundle of 3 cables in a conduit run between a manhole and a building. We'll look at some of the equipment that's involved and at 2 methods of pulling the cable. Now remember that the methods you'll be seeing are only intended as examples. The methods used by your company may be different. When only one accessible manhole is available for a cable pull, there are generally 2 ways a cable can be installed. The first method is to pull and feed the cable from the same manhole. The second method is to rig portable cable pulling equipment at the limited access end of the pull and use the manhole for cable feeding. Let's look first at rigging to feed and pull from the same manhole. To get a clearer picture of how the job will be rigged, Let's look at a simplified illustration of the job site. Here you can see the manhole the crew will be pulling the cable from, and the building to which the cable will be pulled. 2 runs of conduit are needed for this job. One will contain the cable, and the other will be used to assist with the installation process. The cable reel is positioned above the manhole on the side closest to the building. This allows the cable to come off the reel and into the conduit in the direction of its natural bend. A feed tube is rigged to protect the cable and to direct it into the conduit. The cable pulling truck and equipment are placed on the other side of the manhole. Inside the building, a snatch block is rigged to run the pulling rope from one run of conduit to the other, so it can return to the manhole. A snatch block is also installed inside the manhole. The snatch block allows a straight pull out of the conduit. It also redirects the cable pulling rope up to a trap block on the edge of the manhole opening and onto the winch on the pulling truck. Okay, now let's go out to the job site to see the crew prepare for and rig for a similar cable installation job. Much of the planning for the job has already been done. The type and length of cable have already been determined. Also, the cable reel was delivered to the site and properly positioned on jacks. When the crew is ready, they hold a tailgate conference to discuss how the job will be done and to assign job responsibilities. Then, before the manhole is entered, the crew tests the manhole atmosphere for harmful gases and for sufficient oxygen levels. If the manhole checks out, a visual inspection of the manhole is made. Next, both conduit runs are rodded. In this case, the crew is using flexible rodding that comes on a reel. The reel is positioned on the sidewalk next to the manhole, and the rodding is lowered down and inserted into the duct. The rodding is sent through the duct and emerges into the building on the other side. The jet line is attached. The rodding is then used to pull the jet line through each conduit run. Now, a crewman will rig a snatch block inside the building. The block is needed to return the rope that is used to clean the duct and pull the cable to the manhole. The block is mounted on the wall opposite to the conduit run, using a portable pulling eye so that the cable pulling rope and other equipment is pulled in a straight line from the conduit. Meanwhile, the men have begun rigging the manhole for the cable pull. A snatch block is rigged on a portable pulling eye so that the pull on the rope will be straight out of the conduit. Once in place, the jet line is threaded through the snatch block. Then the jet line is attached to the pulling rope. Now they're ready to string the pulling rope. Portable radios are used to coordinate the activities of the crews at the manhole and inside the building. Now the truck winch is used to pull the rope through the conduit. A crewman in the building watches the rope as it's being pulled and signals the man on the winch at the other end to stop the pull when the fitting on the rope reaches the snatch block. The crewman in the building then opens the block and moves the fitting through. Now the rope can be pulled back to the manhole. A trap block is used on the edge of the manhole to deflect the angle of the pull from the snatch block in the manhole to the winch on the truck. Once the pulling rope is returned to the manhole, the crewmen then position the feed tube. At this point, the ends of the cables are taped together. Then a basket or kellum grip is slipped over the cable bundle and wired into place to prevent the basket from slipping during the pull. A hand line is then sent through the feed tube to a crewman below. The crewman below secures the hand line to the pulling rope and installs the end of the feed tube into the conduit. The pulling rope is then brought up through the feed tube and secured to the cable. Radio contact is maintained between crew members on each end of the cable pull. When everything is secured, the OK is given and the cable can be pulled. Then the cable pull begins. As before, the crewmen at the cable reel regulate the amount of slack on the cable. They also inspect the cable as it's pulled off of the reel for defects or other damage. When the cable reaches the other end of the pull, the crewman can secure the cable and then continue on with the job. A second method for pulling cable into a building is to use a portable pulling device. In this case, the portable pulling device being used has a capstan with an electric motor. The machine is designed to exert about 6,000 pounds of pulling force and can be carried by one man. It can be secured in a variety of ways. It may be mounted on the floor as it is here, or it can be strapped to any suitable structure. Regardless of how the machine is installed, it's important for the structure it's mounted on to be able to support the pulling strain. Rigging back at the manhole is the same as for the feed manhole we saw earlier. The cable reel is positioned so that the cable curves in its natural direction. The conduit is rodded and cleaned and threaded with the jet line. The jet line is then attached to a length of pulling rope inside the building, and the rope is pulled back to the manhole. After the rope is connected to the cable, the portable pulling machine is used to pull the cable. Remember, when you're working with equipment that exerts this much strain, it's important to keep in the clear and to follow your company's safety procedures. Well, in this part of the program, we saw two methods of installing cable between a manhole and a building. With the first method, the job was rigged so that both the pull and the feed of the cable were done from the same manhole. With the second method, the manhole is used to feed the cable, but a portable pulling machine is used at the building end to pull the cable through the duct. Now, so far in this program, we've looked at cable installation. We've seen several methods for installing cables by direct burial and in conduit. When we come back, we're going to see how a cable can be removed from conduit in an underground system. For now, read over this material in your textbook and answer the questions.